tweeted this and then deleted it. Just wish you said this to me, but instead on some podcast. And you've got my number. And you're my locker mate. So you could have said this any day. You do realize I shoot the podcast on our off day, exclamation point. Why aren't we talking about everyone's preparations and focus leading up to the game week? I mean, I can point out a lot of things, but I'm just not. Then he deleted it. Bro, your reaction to this podcast mess.
I told you, my thoughts on the podcast well documented. I don't think Micah should have been doing it from the get-go.
True.
Because he's young and hasn't won yet. And if you look at most of the guys, the Kelsey brothers, they've won. They're veterans. Draymond Green, won, veteran. Paul George at least is a veteran. All right, even though he hasn't won. Well, Pat Bev's a veteran. Okay. I mean, I'm just saying, like, a guy that knows the,
Michael
the way
Porter
things
Jr.,
work.
I guess he's won. Damn, you're right.
If you win or you're a veteran, fine. But Micah, and it's not even his fault. He's just young. All right, so I don't think he should have been doing the podcast from day one. That said, Micah's right. Like, Malik Hooker, did he forget he was? I think he forgot he was on the podcast.
I don't think he did.
He thought he and Keyshawn were just chilling,
I don't think
talking. I mean, like, Micah is absolutely right. Why didn't you just come to me and say, man, look, I don't think it's a good idea. Because I think Malik's talking for the team, too.
Maybe he is.
I don't think he's just talking for, Micah says he didn't go to him. So here's the problem. If Micah drops the podcast now.
Well, he can't. He just got promoted.
I know. He's the president now. So now is he going to be editing other podcasts or what?
I don't think
come on.
Doing that. He's got people that rely on it.
And if he did drop it, it looks like he's kowtowing to Malik Hooker now. The best thing for them to do is for Malik to go on the Micah's podcast.
Oh, my God.
And no, seriously. And they settle it. And then if Micah decides, you know what? I am gonna drop it because this year, man, it's all we are.
Oh, and then this is like a final.
Then it'll look better, then you're not just kowtowing to Malik Hooker.
Let's do one more podcast and then shut it down.
Wouldn't that be a huge podcast?
I don't know.
That'd be a huge podcast.
All right, so here's the problem, because I think so much of this is silly nonsense. I don't even think what Malik Hooker there was saying made a lot of sense, to be honest. He's like, if our run game's terrible, are you worried about that, or are you worried about your podcast audience?
So I think but sometimes Micah airs out problems with his own team.
So maybe
so you're saying rather than she shouldn't say, I
don't know, but we've seen issues.
But here's the point I'm making. And as you guys know, I often like to quote various scenes from The Wire.
Yes.
Slim Charles at one point says to Avon Barksdale, it don't matter if it's a lie. If it's a lie, we have to fight on the lie. And what he's saying is, what is true is no longer relevant. What is relevant is what people believe and the perception, and that is the reality with which we must live. Even if I think it's nonsense that Micah's podcast is actually causing any real harm, there's now the placebo effect almost that it's perceived to. And now it's a problem.
Yeah.
Because now it actually has caused problem because in this meta world of criticism of the podcast on a different podcast has caused a problem within that locker room. It just has.
Yeah.
To where he's responding to a teammate, deleting the tweet, and now at training camp, it's got to be addressed.
Got to be on podcast.
So I think that Micah is right now probably pretty typical for how our 20-something-year-old super famous, star athletes would always have acted, talked, sounded like, you know what I mean? Good intentions, but don't know what they don't know. But he is just out there in the public space so often. There's a lot of opportunities for him to piss off teammates or other people, and it seems, unfortunately, like that's what's happened here.
Could just become like a
So you agree with me? He should drop it.
Yeah.
This was not purely a we can't afford you. It was a we are turning the page. We as a franchise are turning the page, and we can't turn it fully with Steph, Clay, and Draymond all here. So we're not going to match in a world where Hartenstein's worth 87. And listen, I understand younger player, different position. It's not apples to apples, but there seemingly was no loyalty bonus for Clay, which maybe is good business, but it signaled to me the Warriors were done. Like the Warriors were returning the
Go ahead, I'll ask you a question, Brew. So we just spent the last 5 minutes like, all right, Pelinka couldn't land the plane. LeBron made the call, couldn't land the plane. Are you surprised? I'll ask you a two-parter, Brew. Pick your question. Are you surprised that Steph didn't throw his body in front of this? And do you think that this will affect, this trio has been together so long, had their highest highs, do you think removing one part of the trio affects the other two guys negatively?
That's a great question. Questions.
Plural.
Yeah. I'm not going to blame Steph for not jumping into and saying, hey, you got to keep Clay, because it's not like keeping Clay is going to make them a championship contender. All right? And I'm not saying Steph is fine with him leaving. I'm sure he would want him there. But Steph probably also wants to do whatever we can to get back to a championship level. And I think the best thing for him to do probably is to just stay out in front, stay away from it, because it would just be emotional. It'd just be sentimental. If they re-sign Clay, would we be saying they're any better than they are today? I mean, he's better than nothing, which is what they have now. But I'm just saying. So the second part, Draymond, and I don't know what his relationship with Clay was, but when he kind of laughed it off on the podcast, remember when Clay stopped following him on social media and all that stuff, that shows that I think Draymond seems like he'll be fine moving on. I do think Steph will be bothered.
As long as Draymond's got Jackson for the podcast, he's not. He's got his team in place.
No, look, I think that also Clay may have taken less money elsewhere is a little different than taking less money from where you've been and you won championships.
So that part I totally agree with. That there is. If a place I'll just use Fox as an example, just because there's the only TV job I've ever had. I've worked here my whole career. If all of a sudden I felt like they were, basically trying to move on from me because they offered me, X dollars, a tenth of what I was making before, I might take that exact same deal with someone else that wouldn't feel disrespectful because it's like, no, I have sweat equity, and in Clay's case, championship equity built up with you.
Yeah,
so I agree with that.
And the role, they were asking him maybe to come off the bench.
So that part, and I also think there was an emotion of, man, I am not going to be able to quit thinking about the player I was before the injuries as long as I'm still wearing this uniform.
I buy that.
Like that I do. I think that is a legitimate human thing. Like for me to be able to fully accept that I'm in a different place, I need to literally be in a different place.
Yep.
Like that would make sense. For the Warriors, their miss was those draft picks. You had an opportunity in the midst of championship contention to draft number 2 overall, number 7, and number 14. And the only one of those is a total zero in Wiseman. Yeah. Moody, you're still yet to get anything from. He's so young, you don't want to give up on him. And Kuminga's shown flashes, but it's less about those players not turning into stars and more about their refusal to package those players for known quantities. Oh. And then you add to that that we now got the final results on the Jordan Poole trade. Nothing. You traded him for Chris Paul, essentially, and you just bought Chris Paul out. So like that, you had this late first, was he late first or early second round pick? I don't remember in Poole, that overachieved. You had the second pick. You had 2 other lottery picks. And what you have to show for it is
I think obviously the Jordan Poole thing is terrible. You get nothing for him. But look, Trace Jackson Davis, you got Kuminga, Podziemski. Like they do have some young talent. I'm not saying it's not championship level talent, but if they can get a Markkanen. Well, and I don't want to make him seem like he's the second.
That was my number one Lakers target. I think he's excellent, but I just don't see how they're going to be able to square. It seems like.
The Levine thing is bizarre.
It's not bizarre if they're just trying to cut money. If they think we need to get under the tax to reset all the calendars,
I think it's get under the tax unless we can build like a team we know is right there with the top contenders in the league.
Yeah, fair enough.
Give me quickly out the